Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
Located on Lake Pontchartrain, Frisbee's Lakefront Restaurant and Bar offers traditional West End favorites, a scenic view, oysters, and numerous tasty options. More information is available at 504-304-4125 or brisbeesrestaurant.com. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile. Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.
Good evening, New Orleans, and welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Over the next hour, talk about the New Orleans Saints, New Orleans Pelicans, LSU, and Tulane. And a great panel to do it tonight. Two guys that I really enjoy having on the program. Jeff Duncan, columnist for New Orleans Times-Picayune and NOLA.com, and Brett Martel of the Associated Press. Gentlemen, welcome. Thanks for coming down as always. Really enjoy having you guys on the show. Always like to start off letting the folks know a little bit about what's going on in your professional lives. Jeff, why don't you take us first? Tell us about the Times-Picayune and that incredible podcast that you and Larry Holder got going, man. I tell you what.
Incredible. I like that.
It's on fire.
Buffalo reviews. Yeah, of course, we do that Dat Chat podcast every Tuesday. And just back from Super Bowl this past weekend, Hall of Fame. And we're gearing up for the All-Star game.
Yeah.
You know, here it's upon us. Along with Mardi Gras, we got this big rollout of coverage with the All-Star Game. It's a great get for New Orleans, so I think people will be treated to some great basketball.
Yeah, no doubt about it. A lot of celebrities be in town as well. Brett, tell us a little bit about the Associated Press.
Yeah, AP is a global news company based in New York, and I'm kind of like a correspondent in New Orleans, you know, telling New Orleans sports stories to the region and the world and stuff. And so not, you know, published quite as much locally, but people can find AP stuff online. And, you know,
Now, were you at the Super Bowl as well?
I did go to the Super Bowl, but I wasn't working.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so you were just a casual observer?
It was the first time I had gone. Yeah, it was my fourth Super Bowl, but first one as a fan, and it was much more fun.
I bet it was. Well, can I ask you guys both, how was Houston as a host city?
I thought they did an outstanding job. You know, I was pleasantly surprised. It was very convenient, the downtown area, very efficiently run. The Super Bowl committee over there really learned lessons from the last time that they put it on. And by and large, everyone in the media business said it was one of the best, most efficient Super Bowls they've ever had.
How about logistically? Everything was pretty close?
Yeah, everything was right downtown in a little small area. The problem is Houston's downtown is really not that great of a entertainment nightlife district. You end up out in the Spaghetti Junction around town. But as far as a setup for fans right downtown, I mean, the stadium's a little bit further away, but it's 15 minutes at the most. Unlike San Francisco last year, it was like an hour and a half away. So I thought they did a great job with everything, and boy, they got a great game too.
Yeah, they really did. Well, the first year they had it, I remember, I was doing sports radio back then. They created like a mini Bourbon Street, if you remember back then. They tried to emulate what we were doing here, a mini French Quarter, mini Bourbon Street. Of course, people didn't really think much of it, didn't really fit the bill, but obviously they've learned from that. They've done better. As a fan, your thoughts, and of course, you've been to Super Bowls before, so how do you think they did?
Yeah, I mean, the game day experience was fine. They had a big security perimeter, but a lot of entertainment within that perimeter. So once you got in, there was, you know, even if you came several hours early, there was a lot to do or see. And you know, it's a nice stadium. All the seats are pretty good. The halftime show I thought was really good.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be in the mix now for future Super Bowls. And I wouldn't have thought that 5 or 10 years ago, but I think they're going to be a formidable competitor for these games in the future.
But logistically too, I mean, you know, the thing as great as South Florida was when the Saints were there, you know, it's like half the media corps was in Fort Lauderdale, but the Saints were in Miami, and then the stadium's in between. So there's a lot of driving around, and I know Houston is driving town too, but everything seemed a little bit more centralized to me in Houston, and the stadium's not that far from the West University neighborhood, kind of like where Rice is and stuff, and that's a nice area of Houston.
Well, good news at the Super Bowl for the New Orleans Saints and Morton Anderson. He's in the Hall of Fame. Jeff, I'll take you first. Well-deserved. I guess the big question was, man, it's about time, huh?
Right, and look, he'd been a finalist 4 times. This was his 4th time, his 5th time on the ballot. And I think he really needed to get in this year, or he was not going to get in anytime soon. For whatever reason, kickers are not as valued as other position players in the Pro Football Selection Committee room. And, it was touch and go there. I think it was somewhat of an upset that he got in. But it was a good year to get in. Other than LaDainian Tomlinson, there was really no other shoe-in. And I think the fact that Morton Anderson's the leading scorer in the history of the league, and I think more than anything else, that he was a 2-time all-decade selection, first-team all-decade selection. There's only 4 other players ever, and they were Dick Butkus, Walter Payton, Reggie White, and Jerry Rice, all first-ballot inductees. So Morton certainly had a very credible case, and I was very gratified to see him get in.
Yeah, it was really good news for Saints fans. Your thoughts, Brett?
Yeah, I was pulling for him all along. Jeff and I are on the Saints Hall of Fame media selection committee, and he was obviously a no-brainer for that. And you just think about his longevity and how many big kicks he had made, and then on top of that, he's just an extremely likable guy, and he was always just a good competitor. But the way in an era where guys didn't really tend to play that long, he played a long time, and. When people would always say, well, the reason he scored so much is because he played so long. And I said, well, the reason he played so long is because he was good enough to play that long. Right. And I think that's probably an argument you had to make to the Hall of Fame committee and stuff, and I think everybody finally understood.
And I think the other thing that was important, and it's always important for any position in this Hall of Fame selection criteria, is did he redefine the position? Did he kind of change the position? And Morton Anderson certainly did. Yeah. He was the first really great long field goal kicker. Yes. He gave Jim Mora confidence. If they got around the 40-yard line, they were going to try field goals. Yes. They built that whole dome patrol offense kind of around his left leg. So he redefined it. He was one of the leaders in touchbacks every year. So he truly had almost every box that you would check off as a Hall of Famer. Plus, he checked off.
One of the, if not the, I think the greatest clutch kicker of all time. You put him in a position where he's got to win a game for you. He's knocking it through the uprights.
Yeah, I think he had the most game-winning kicks in history.
Over 100.
Oh yeah, in history, late in the game as it was defined. But it still was difficult to convince people to put. There was still, there's 48 voters, and there was just a small group. But the discussion in the room, once it became open for discussion, there were a lot of advocates for him, including some of the former players that were on the committee. So I think there was a lot of momentum to push him through.
Jerry Jones makes the Hall of Fame as an owner. I found it interesting that he made it, but it got me thinking about Tom Benson. Tom Benson was on the finance committee, did a lot in terms of when you look at the lease that Benson has gotten from the Saints. At one time, the state cutting a check to Benson. Look at the money that he's poured into the Hall of Fame itself. Guys, I'll ask you, is there a place in the Hall of Fame for Tom Benson?
I'll be shocked if he gets in. I think it's a very long shot. Very few owners get in. Jerry Jones got in not because of his role as the owner of the Super Bowl champions. I think they had 2 Super Bowls under him. He got in for his work on really as a league leader in redefining the business model of the NFL, the new stadium expansion. Fans might argue that he shouldn't get in because he really made this a much more expensive game for the everyday fan by increasing new stadium construction across the league, and also his work on the TV contracts, working with the TV committee. He sat on that committee, and that has been a huge revenue boon for the league. It's taken it to a whole nother level. So really, all those different things that he was on the vanguard of is why he got in. I know Eddie DeBartolo got in a few years ago with the 49ers.
One of the Maras in, I think?
And Maras and the George Hallis. There's a few in, but they're so much far more accomplished in other facets of the game than Tom Benson. With 1 Super Bowl, it's going to be very difficult. If you put Tom Benson in, you're going to put in every owner that has ever won a Super Bowl, because his lease agreement with the state of Louisiana, it doesn't affect anybody else in the league, really, to a small degree of how much money they contribute.
Right.
I'd be surprised. It'd be very much a long shot.
How about you, Brett? Your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, even if he doesn't make the Hall of Fame, it doesn't mean he didn't accomplish a lot of good things for New Orleans. And in particular, maybe in some ways, he helped establish new models for how a small market team can be successful. In terms of, creative, overseeing some creative leases.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
And so, I mean, because he took a small market team, he made it profitable, and he made them, and they won a lot. I mean, they haven't won the last 3 years, but they did win probably more games overall than any NFL team for a 4-year period, I think, or 3-year period.
Yeah.
From 2009 to 11. So,
and then you look at the more years as well, with the exception of the San Francisco 49ers. They were one of the more winning teams in the league during that time as well.
Well, we've pointed out on this show before, since '99, since the last Ditka year, and if you throw out the Katrina season, where there was really kind of an anomaly, an outlier year,
right.
The worst this franchise has been 7-9. I mean, that's a long period of time. That's a decade and a half of being at least 7-9 or better.
Right.
They never really bottomed out. A lot of fans would say maybe they need to bottom out so they can get a better draft pick and clean house. But there's an accomplishment to be competitive every year.
Yes.
Well, the Patriots didn't need to bottom out. So.
Yeah, no, they kept it going.
They are an outlier as well.
Yeah. And I think you were in Houston with a Patriot hat on, am I right?
No jersey?
No jersey, no nothing?
I am from New England, that's true.
Yes.
But I had a family member through marriage, Joe Villano, defensive tackle, who used to play for the Patriots.
Okay.
Number 92 for the Falcons now, and he played a couple dozen snaps in that game. So everybody I was with was Atlanta fans, and I just tried to watch it analytically and unemotionally, as a journalist normally would.
Spoken like a true New Orleanian as well.
Right.
There you go. Guys, I brought this up on my show on Monday. With Morton Anderson now going into the NFL Hall of Fame, the official retiring of jerseys for the New Orleans Saints. It was Jimmy Taylor and Doug Atkins had their jerseys officially retired. That goes back to the expansion season, what they did when they came to the team. I think Jimmy Taylor averaged 29.7 yards a game in his first year, in his only year with the Saints. Atkins had a pretty good 3 seasons with the Saints and probably could have played a couple more, but let's face it, Taylor was a Green Bay Packer and Atkins was a Chicago Bear.
No question.
But Archie Manning's jersey has not been utilized by another Saint player. Sicky Powell, the former equipment manager, will not allow anyone to use that jersey. But we've seen 7 being used by players, 57, 77, of course, Morton Anderson, Ricky Jackson, Willie Roaf. Those 3 are in the NFL Hall of Fame. They're all in the Ring of Honor. Can you see them, the Saints, going out and retiring those jerseys so no one ever wears those jerseys again? And maybe the criteria from this point forward is you go into the NFL Hall of Fame, no one wears your jersey.
Well, I just think they feel like they're doing the exact same thing by recognizing them in the Ring of Honor. I think that honor, by having them displayed in the stadium, they feel like does the same thing. I mean, the fact that somebody's still wearing the jersey on the field, I don't think in their mind, the Saints officials' mind, is really any different. I've often thought about that because I think Steve Gleason, I've always wanted to see his jersey retired for everything he's done in the organization. And there's a lot of players been wearing 37 around the last few years. But it's something that the league kind of frowns upon because they don't want there to be a backlog of jerseys, jersey numbers, and reducing the jersey numbers, especially when you get to training camp when you have like 90 players at camp and you're going to run out of numbers. So I think that's one of the main reasons they don't do it.
Brett, can you add anything?
I would just say football's the toughest sport to retire numbers because you not only have more players, but you have numbers strictly by position. Like if you remember, Reggie Bush had to change his number from 5 at USC to 25 in New Orleans, and then fortunately Raphael Bush took that number, so no one had to, everyone could keep the current jersey. But I just think it's a tough thing to do, and there's something to be said maybe for the players' accomplishments de facto retiring the number because other players can't bring themselves to wear that number because they don't feel like it fits them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it kind of takes care of itself in a way in terms of number 8 and probably will in terms of number 9.
Yeah, that's the next one. You got to believe it's not going to be utilized. A friend of mine brought this to my attention recently. Jim Moore when will he be in the ring of honor in the Dome? I got to think he's got to be the next one that's up, right? Or is it going to be Drew Brees when he retires? Moore did a lot for this franchise before, obviously, he quit in the middle of the season, which again kind of left a bad taste in Benson's mouth. But he's been a big part. He was the first coach that gave us a winning season.
Yeah, multiple playoff appearances, and really was just unfortunate. Those great teams were also in the same division as the 49ers, the great dynasty of the Niners. But those teams certainly elevated the Saints' profile and kind of legitimized the organization for the first time, because they were pretty much, let's face it, a laughing stock under John Meekham's tenure. And I think it was a feather in the cap for Jim Finks and Tom Benson to make that hire, because Jim Moore was USFL. I mean, he was a guy that didn't have a whole lot of a big name credibility when he came here, and really kind of turned the franchise around pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the same can be said for Finks as well, right?
Yeah. And I could see both those guys at some point being worthy of being up there.
Well, they were the ones that brought in the Saints' first two Hall of Famers, right?
Yes.
Jackson and Rowe. And I don't know how much the coach back then would have had to do with the scouting, as you know. And a lot of times now, Sean will be very hands-on in terms of who they pick, but still, he incorporated them in, and they flourished and became Hall of Fame players.
Let's talk about the Benson family feud. Last week on Friday, there was supposedly a resolution to the suit. The suit was against the trustees who handled the trust, not necessarily the heirs, the 3 R's, so to speak. It was in federal court. There was a settlement on the non-voting and non-controlling shares for the Saints and Pelicans. Benson ultimately wanted all the shares back from the heirs and wanted to buy them. He had to replace those shares with something of equal value. He had originally I think he had taken some his Texas assets and moved those to try to satisfy what the trustees were asking for. Guys, is this it? Are we done with this now? In your mind, is there going to be something else down the line here? Well, we don't know what the settlement was, because obviously that's been sealed. The NFL and the NBA, for proprietary reasons, did not want their books to be open. They didn't want their stuff in the public. Obviously, from the Benson standpoint, they probably didn't want Tom Benson on the stand, so you figure the heirs probably were in a position of strength when they were coming to this settlement. What's your thoughts?
Well, the way I understand it, the heirs are very satisfied with the settlement. They feel very good about what the terms that they got. So I would assume that they had some leverage in that. I don't think we know for sure if there's closure on this at all. I think there's certainly temporary closure, but there could be another legal battle down the road when the will is enacted after Tom Benson passes away to succeed his successor, which is going to be Gail Benson. There could be another legal battle at that point.
Yeah, I would say Tom has closure and Gail does not. So
that's the way I read it as well.
And in some respects, it didn't really matter if the heirs were satisfied with this. It only mattered if the trustees were, because they were really the ones involved, because they're just trying to fulfill their legal obligation to say, if you take something out of this irrevocable trust, it has to be of equal value. And it was a very technical settlement, because they were dealing with a lot of money, and particularly promissory notes, which come due over a certain period of time. And I think the technical details that held it up for so long after the initial settlement was announced last June had mostly to do with the structure of those payments and how they would be backed. And that's basically it. And also one of the issues they had to deal with was the value of what was the value of those shares, and what date were they going to use? Because at one point the NFL said, you really can't. It's against our rules for you to leverage yourself this much to pay this off. So we want you to do it a different way. So we offered new promissory notes, and then the trustees said, okay, well then I think we need to go what the value was on the date you offered the new ones, not on the date you offered the original ones. But the judge sided with Benson on that and said, no, it's from the time he made the decision, it's okay to do it that way. And so that kind of sped it along.
Right. Owners actually allowed Tom Benson to borrow 50% over the $250 million debt limit that they put on franchises, which was interesting as well, right?
Yeah, and they also made him offer the type of promissory notes which stated that if I don't pay, you can sue to regain the collateral, which is the shares in the team, but you can't sue me personally to recover what I didn't pay. So if this is not going to happen, but say the shares went down in value and he didn't pay, they could sue to get back the shares that are worth less, but they couldn't sue to get back the value of the shares at the time the settlement was made. But it works in their favor the other way if the shares go up, which, I mean, I don't know what the ceiling is for pro sports, but we may never see it.
Right.
I mean,
Right now, both franchises are a little bit over $2 billion combined, right? What is it, 1.7 for the Saints and about $650 million plus for the Pelicans in terms of value?
I mean, the Florida Marlins just, I think, had an agreement today around $1.6 billion just for a baseball team.
Yeah.
And that's not a very good baseball team.
Right.
So you can see these franchise values are going up. And I've been told that the Pelicans could be sold anytime, and they'd make a huge profit on the Pelicans. What was it originally, $300 and something million?
338 originally,
right.
now probably over $6.
Yeah,
right.
Well, definitely over $6.
Definitely over $6. With
I read
TV
650
contract.
when I was doing the research, and some were saying that it could even go up even more, depending on what's going on. Guys, that was one of the problems here. Was Benson fluid enough to be able to satisfy the trustees and still hold on to the franchises? People are worried in some cases that maybe the Pelicans may have to be sold. Are those worries kind of squashed now at this point?
Well, I don't know if there's a worry, but I think that they still could be sold at some point. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And it wouldn't surprise me at all. And it wouldn't surprise me at some point, especially in the future, if Gail Benson, when she becomes the successor, if she elects to sell a minority share in the team, very much the way Art Modell did with Steve Bisciotti in Baltimore. I could see that happening, bringing in another minority owner who would eventually become the majority owner down the road. They would be involved in the organization at the executive level.
Yes. Guys, this was all set up by Tom Benson early as for future tax implications, almost a tax shelter, so that he could seamlessly pass these teams on to his heirs. With what we're seeing now, could this maybe creep back into this again, ultimately after Mr. Benson dies? Or is this settlement now with the trustees, is it in a position now where the Bensons are good and they may not have overriding tax implications where they have to maybe sell to be able to satisfy the tax when Mr. Benson dies?
I don't think that's an issue at all.
No issue at all at this point?
The attorneys with the Benson organization, with the Saints organization, have set this up for a long time. So as far as I know, that's not a factor.
The only factor, I think, is that basically the heirs knew that the mental competency trial in civil court in New Orleans was a long shot. It was always going to be a long shot to win that. But it was really what it was a trial run and a way to get everything on the record early for all the arguments they're going to use to contest the will. And contesting a will is, lawyers will tell you contesting a will is easier or less challenging, I should say, than proving somebody mentally incompetent. So that's just going to be, an issue down the road. But I think the Saints have proven by this point they have very competent attorneys.
Oh, you would think.
So,
guys, final question on this, because we don't know if ultimately the heirs have an opportunity to come back and regain ownership of this team. Did they have to give up their shares of the Pelicans and Saints, or did they continue in a passive ownership mode with the non-voting shares still in the hands of the heirs, or have they been transferred?
I don't think we know. I don't think anybody. I don't know. Do you know that? I certainly don't know.
Right. No. And that was part of what was sealed.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the terms of this settlement.
But you've spoken to someone that has told you they're very happy with the settlement.
Yeah, very happy, very pleased and satisfied.
Well, I know a lot of Saints fans are happy and satisfied that training camp is coming back to Metairie. You guys have spent a lot of time up in West Virginia. What are your thoughts on that? I think it's good for the community. I think one of the reasons why that facility was built was so that they could have their training camps here in New Orleans. I know that there is a value on getting away and just having the team worrying about football and no distraction of family, et cetera, back here in New Orleans. But the fan base could use a little energy, could be energized a little bit by them coming here and practicing back in New Orleans.
Well, I think it's a good thing. I mean, there's no doubt the state invested on that training facility. Fans certainly get excited early on. They don't have to read about it from afar. I know the people that aren't happy about it or aren't excited are the players because they're going to be practicing out in that brutal heat compared to what we had up in West Virginia, which were ideal conditions. And I'll be honest with you, either way, whether in West Virginia or they're down here, it doesn't matter. A hill of beans has no factor on how this team plays during the season. That's so overblown and overrated. The fact that people think they went 7-9 because they were at the Greenbrier, and the Houston Texans are going up there, so we'll see if they bottom out. Maybe there'll be more credence to it.
Yes.
I think that's been an overrated thing all along.
Generally, I would say where they train, as long as they have baseline needs met, that where they train and what the record is more coincidental. It has much more to do with the management of the roster.
Yes.
But I would say that, it's a mixed bag, definitely, because, if you ask me, I'm against it because I liked going up there.
Right.
Jeff and I used to jog along the Greenbrier River in nice, cool evenings. It was nice to get out of the heat for a while, and they had 2 nice football fields outdoors out of the heat. And now, during training camp, they do have the indoor air-conditioned facility to get out of the rain and get out of the heat if it's extreme heat. But usually with 90 players, you want 2 fields at one time, right? So that's the only area where, they're going to have to push the limits in terms of keeping the players hydrated and exposing them to extreme heat, and we're going to have to be exposed to extreme heat trying to watch this.
Sean Payton talked a lot about how after they got up there at training camp, they had less, hamstring injuries, all these soft tissue injuries because they weren't dehydrated. And I think there's some validity to that. And look, that's a state-of-the-art facility that was built just for NFL training camp purposes. They're not going to have a better facility than that, and the Texans now are going to take advantage of it.
Why do you think they didn't renew the lease?
I don't think Tom Benson wanted to go back. I think it was plain and simple. The owner wanted to be here. And look, Tom Benson's going to be 90 in July. Traveling up there, he had some health issues in that high altitude. I can understand it.
Right.
Yeah, and there are clear benefits to being here in terms of energizing the fan base. There's no doubt about that. And one thing we do know is that while training in Metairie wasn't the reason that they won a Super Bowl and went to the playoffs 4 to 5 years from 09 to 13, clearly they can train in Metairie and have the best 5-year period in franchise history. So, it's not going to be an impediment to their success, and it may be good for the fans, and it certainly would be good for Tom to be able to be close to home at his age. So.
Big shakeup in the coaching staff with Joe Vitt, Bill Johnson, Greg McMahon, all being released. James Willis, Stan Kwan, where all their contracts were not renewed as well. Mike Nolan comes in as linebacker coach. Curtis Johnson is back as wide receiver coach. Bradford Banta is the special teams coordinator. Ryan Nielsen is at least the published report saying he's going to be the defensive line coach. Your thoughts on these replacements?
Well, I think there's some interesting ones in there. Mike Nolan's an interesting, veteran coach, been a head coach. Bringing back Curtis Johnson, I think, is interesting. I mean, now you've got Dennis Allen back, you have Joe Lombardi back, Curtis Johnson. I mean, this is a method of operation that has worked successfully for him before. And I think you kind of went outside the box to get Nielsen. That's a guy that I didn't know much about. I don't think anybody knew much about.
True.
We'll see. Look, they needed to shake it up. There's no question that it was getting a little stale out there, the message, and I think I admire them for, doing that. That's not easy to do when you have guys that you've been loyal to for over a decade. But I think clearly there was some need for change on the defensive side of the ball and special teams.
Yeah, it's a nice mix of institutional knowledge with a guy like Nolan, and 3 decades in the NFL, I think. Now.
Some head coaching experience that they brought in as well, right?
And then, everyone knows Curtis Johnson left on great terms, not good terms. He left on fantastic terms, but they supported him being a head coach. So they're very pleased to be able to have the opportunity to get him back when last year's receivers coach who did a good job, but he got a promotion. I mean, he got an offensive coordinator at the Jets. So that's a really fortuitous, I think, thing that Curtis was available at least enough to resign from Chicago and come down here. So I think they're moving in the right direction there.
We're not too far away from tagging players with the franchise tag. Do you anticipate the Saints tagging anyone in this upcoming free agency period? I guess the only guy that you would think about would maybe Nick Fairley at this point, and I don't know if they would even want to roll the dice on that.
I can't see it.
No, I don't think they'll tag anybody.
No.
And they've got some money to spend, but it's all relative. I mean, there's still like 20 teams in the league that have more money than they do, and it's not a good free agency class. It's widely regarded as one of the worst in years. So I expect them to be kind of judicious with who they go and target. Maybe a guard, maybe a veteran guard, maybe a veteran corner, but I don't see much outside of that unless they find a pass rusher that they really like that they want to throw in the mix. But those guys get expensive. Corners and pass rushers are, $10, $12 million for the most part. And it'll be interesting to see what they do with Fairley if they get into that market, because he certainly has earned a pretty sizable, promotion.
Do you anticipate a bidding war for him?
Well, I think somebody out there will go after him, but I think there's going to be some people wondering if the real Nick Fairley was who played last year, or the guy that kind of had an up and down career in Detroit and some of these other in Los Angeles or St. Louis. And I think there's going to be some trepidation to give him a big money deal when he had this reputation for kind of being up and down. What
are your thoughts on Fairley? Because again, if they lose him, they got to fill that hole. They don't want to get. I would think they don't want to get in a bidding war for him. I'm not buying into he's only he's not that far from Mobile. At the end of the day, he sees how many years he's got left in the league. He's gonna be looking for money.
He will be looking for money, but the hometown discount exists because if you're in a good situation, it's worth taking somewhere in between 10 and 20% less to maintain a good situation. That's just something that like an executive consultant will tell you in human resources, for example. And maybe the players aren't that sophisticated about that kind of stuff, but I think the agents who are mostly attorneys are and know that. Of course, the agents will always push for the biggest contract because they're getting a commission. So it just really depends. But, workplace happiness is important. And Fairley said all along that he felt he would be happier here and that it would make him more effective in a sense. And a lot of people can relate to that, and it did. So it's going to be a consideration for him. It's not just the Saints. It's going to be where he's at.
Yes.
It's going to ultimately decide this.
What about free agency targets? So do you agree with Jeff? Guard would probably be one of the big targets, maybe outside pass rusher, but they're expensive.
Yeah, and they can try to get another linebacker. I mean, they tried with a linebacker last year and it just didn't work out. But they could certainly use somebody there. They need depth on the offensive line.
For sure.
So,
guys, what about the draft? I got to figure that defense is going to be the priority in this year's draft, showing up that defense. If they don't fill the offensive line needs, especially on the right side, with Evans and Streif aging, I believe that's got to be a part of this as well.
Well, in the past, the way they've worked is to try and fill every need they've got in free agency so they can go into the draft and really just take the best player on the board. This year, though, if you just look at the makeup of the top prospects, they're almost all at positions that they could use help at. I mean, there's a lot of edge rushers, there's some linebackers, there's some corners. Those are all, every level of the defense they could use help at. So I think it's going to fit in that the best player on the board is going to be like a Rankins last year, also fits one of their needs. So I'll be surprised if they go in any other direction. What'll be interesting to see, and I had my first mock draft about a week ago, is if they do invest in a quarterback at some point in this draft to try and have somebody, if they don't believe Garrett Grayson's the heir apparent, getting somebody ready to be groomed behind Breeze, because he is, let's face it, he's going to be in the last year of his contract.
One-year deal. Yep.
Right, so it'll be interesting to see if they pull the trigger.
Yeah, as far as Breeze goes, I think I wouldn't worry about his contract because I'm pretty confident he'll go out of his way to try to finish his career here. It's not to say he definitely will.
Can I stop you there? Even if they have another losing season?
Well,
what if they bottom out?
If they go 4-12? If they bottom out in a team that's really close and just needs a quarterback, I mean, yeah, there are certain circumstances, but I think that the most likely scenario is that he's going to work out another short-term deal to keep playing here. And as long as, he continues to be healthy and perform like Tom Brady did this year, too, who's a year older than he is, then there's no telling. But, it could be 2 or 3 more years. But looking at the draft, I mean, they tried to get an edge rusher with Kikaha, and he tore his left ACL for the 3rd time. So, and that was 2 years ago when they drafted him. So they still need that. And that, in the draft probably, because they don't know how Kikaha is going to come back, even though they're trying to be optimistic about his prospects.
You're watching Inside New Orleans Sports each and every Thursday night at 6 p.m. right here on WLAE-TV. We have a rebroadcast at 10 p.m. on Friday night here on WLAE. And, of course, Pelican Sports Television, that is statewide, 9 o'clock on Friday nights. Great panel for you tonight. Brett Martel of the Associated Press, Jeff Duncan of NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We'll be right back after these messages.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Amco Fence, locally owned and operated since 1976. Fully licensed and insured and a member of the BBB, Amco serves both residential and commercial customers. If you're looking to repair, replace, or install a fence for security or aesthetic reasons, Amco Fence supplies wooden, metal, chain link, vinyl, and ornamental or automatic gates. Amco aims to satisfy your fencing needs. Amco Fence, 504-468-9559 or amcofencecompany.com.
TikTok Cafe, located on Causeway South at the I-10 in Metairie, is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our menu offers breakfast dishes like our Western omelet made from scratch biscuits, grits, egg sunny side up, and lunch specials like our homemade cheeseburgers with a side of golden brown fries. Don't forget about our weekday lunch special and that every Tuesday is steak night. TikTok Cafe, open 24/7 at Causeway South at the I-10 in Metairie.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Jeff Duncan of Times-Picayune and NOLA.com and Brett Martel of the Associated Press are our guests tonight. We'll switch to the Pelicans. It's All-Star Week. This has always been a festive week when the NBA brings their All-Star game here to New Orleans. The third time that they've come to New Orleans. The first time that they came was Chris Paul and David West, and of course, their move to the playoffs. And of course, we saw them a few years ago, and Anthony Davis obviously involved in that game. And they're back again. Anthony Davis will be starting. But the Pelicans are at a crossroads here. The question is, as you're going into the All-Star break, the mythical halfway part of this portion of the season, is this a team that is going to blow it up, or is this a team that's going to try to add pieces this season to try to make a run at the 8th spot? There's been rumors out there that the Pelicans have been in contact with the Philadelphia 76ers for Jahlil Okafor, possibly moving Alexis Agenza, and maybe next year, that's 2018's protected first-round pick. They've been trying to move Amir Sheik. Whether that's going to happen or not with his albatross contract is up in the air. And of course, Brook Lopez was also rumored as a possibility of coming here to New Orleans. Guys, Dell Demps has been here for 7 years. He's had a chance to rebuild this team twice. They've had one winning season in his tenure here. What's the future for the Pelicans?
Well, there's a lot in that. I mean, there's trying to determine if they can get back into this number 8 seed, this kind of foolhardy quest to get the number 8 seed and get eliminated in the very first round of the playoffs. But look, the guys on the team, they're competitors. They're wanting to be involved. But I really believe that Mickey Loomis and Tom Benson really have to watch every move that's being made, because if they don't believe that this front office is the future, you've really got to be careful allowing them to make moves that could affect the future of the franchise. So I think any move that's made is going to be done organizationally now, more so than just let Dell Demps pull the trigger on some of these trades. And I think it's interesting that trade, the reports initially on Jahlil Okafor said that they were in advanced trade discussions. Mm-hmm. Advanced tends to indicate that something's close.
Yeah, it's close.
And nothing's happened.
It kind of cooled for a while after that.
So I'm wondering if that may have been just a trial balloon by the Pelicans operatives to see how it played out in the public, and they pulled back on it. And look, they weren't the only team involved. I mean, they're shopping Okafor all over the league. Mm-hmm. All these big men have been shopped around the league. So there's a lot of teams involved.
Brett, you've been covering this team for a while. What can you add?
Well, I don't know. I'm Jeff. I'm skeptical as to how advanced they were, because what I heard was it was just a lot of talk and not really anything going on. But Dell is doing what he has to do, which is to try to explore every possible opportunity to move guys, especially the guys that Gentry have decided just aren't working out in his system. And Dell liked Agenza. And Dell also gets along really well with Agenza's agent, Mark Bartelstein. who was also Lance Stevenson's agent. And they worked out a deal to kind of get him in here until he got hurt.
Yes.
I had an amicable parting of ways there. When he got hurt, when he did get hurt, they had to release him. But Dell's trying to figure out how to move these guys, and Ashik, you called it an albatross contract. I mean, that's pretty much what it is. It's virtually impossible to trade him right now.
Right.
Maybe next year, and definitely the year after, just as like a salary cap dump, because although it was a 5-year contract, it was only guaranteed for 4. So this is the second year, but this year you can't do it. Right. I mean, it's guaranteed 2 more seasons after.
Yeah,
this.
Who's going to trade for him?
Yeah, the only way it works is if you get you need to be a 3rd or 4th team in a big deal, like a Melo contract, that it's a huge contract, and they need, in order to make the deal work, that you need a big contract with a team that's already over the cap that may want to just, ultimately just pay him and cut him.
Well, and the problem the Pelicans have right now is they're kind of asset starved. They really don't have a lot of assets, and that's why a lot of the 76ers, the report was that they were looking at one of their draft picks, because that's one of the only assets they have, other than maybe Drew Holiday, who's going to be a free agent, so people are going to be a little hesitant to trade for him. And Tyreke Evans is hurt again. He might have some trade value, but they just don't have a lot to trade.
Right. Let me take you on that, Brett, because that's the other key to this. You've got the trading deadline coming up. They have been lambasted, and rightly so, in the front office for allowing Ryan Anderson and Eric Gordon to get away with nothing for nothing. Even future picks would have been something when you knew these guys weren't coming back. Drew Holiday, they obviously want to keep him. The question is, does he want to be here in New Orleans? And, or is he going to test the open market? The other one is obviously Tyreke Evans, who, he's been often injured. Will they try to move those guys by the trading deadline?
Well, it's complicated now because Tyreke didn't play the last game with a sprained left ankle, and we'll see if he can play on the road trip. And this road trip, if they struggle on this one like they did on the last one, they'll be in a situation where they've lost about 9 out of 10 games and falling farther out of the race for the 8th spot, where you're pretty much going to have to try to blow it up and get rid of anybody that still has value. So with Evans being in the last year of his contract, if he's healthy and another team thinks they can use him, could be tradable. Jensen's tradable just because he's 7'2", and under the new CBA and the new TV contract and everything, of $5 million a year for 7'2" guys.
Nothing.
So he's tradable. And Holiday is probably the most tradable they have. I mean, you can't trade AD, so in a sense he's untradeable because you have to keep him. So it would be Holiday, but I think one of the reasons, I mean, they're invested in Holiday a lot. I think they really believe in him. They were very good to him this offseason. And I think they're hoping that he'll be deferential to them when it comes time for free agency because they've treated him like family.
Yes.
So he knows he has a situation here where he, all things being equal, if they can just get a few more really they need a really good wing player is what they need, and maybe a little help in the front court, and they could be a lot more competitive, and then just luck with injuries.
Well, that leads me to my next question. Okay, they treated him like family, but what if this regime is not here? Again, Dell Demps has been given two chances to be able to rebuild this franchise over a 7-year period. Again, 1 winning season, as I mentioned. Gentry is not, even though I don't think he's gotten the tools to be able to be successful, he has not been successful here. There was a lot of pushback on the hiring of Gentry. Some people wanted bigger names out there to be able to get involved in this franchise. I mean, they've lost the casual NBA fan. The casual NBA fan doesn't care anymore. They're not at the arena anymore. They got to do something to energize the fan base. They believe making the 8th seed will somehow energize the fan base, when in essence you really ought to be looking at how you can surround Anthony Davis with players to be successul.
Yeah, and that's the problem they're in this year, because this is a very unusual year. Normally, you would never suggest tanking. It would not be the ultimate goal. But because Golden State is so powerful this year, and the only hope you really have right now is to get the 8th seed. You're really playing for one playoff spot, and it's almost a single elimination. You're going to be out. It's not a normal year. It's not a year that I think you could really have a lot of hope that an 8 could beat a 1. And so therefore, I think the circumstances this year really make it difficult for the long-term future to suggest it's a good thing to make the playoffs. I don't think it is this year.
No, I don't either.
And in another year it would be, but not this year. I think Golden State is on such another level. They've won 20 of the last 21 games against the Pelicans, Hornets. I mean, it's not a team they're going to beat in a series.
And that 8th seed is probably going to be below 500.
Probably will be. The only argument you could make for it is that they've got some young players, and they're like Buddy Hield, who they want to learn how to win and to learn how to make big shots. And so there would be some value in making a run at the end of the season in terms of the growth of the people who are on the roster. But they would still need to be able to bolster them, and it's harder to do that with a pick back in the draft.
Out of the lottery.
Yeah, with a pick out of the lottery. So, it's,
it's a catch-22.
Yeah, it's because I think the message has been skewed. I think that originally they tried to be able to build the team around Anthony Davis quickly to get to the playoffs, to be a playoff contender. Though the players they brought in were often injured. I mean, you couldn't get, when you look at Gordon and Anderson, you look at Tyreek and also Holiday, those were the core guys. They were injured constantly, so you never were able to get to that point. You gave up draft picks for Holiday. That hurts you. You gave up, productive players in Vasquez and Lopez for Tyreek Evans.
Right.
So, where are you when this thing bottoms out?
And, the other thing I think, just being at the game against Utah, which was really a poor performance by them, there's really a lack of identity. And the players have talked about that earlier this year, and they're still, I think, here we are 50 games into the season, and they still don't really know who they are.
Yes.
There's, who the Houston Rockets are. They're going to bomb from outside. You know how Oklahoma City plays. We know Golden State. We still haven't seen them find that identity, the Alvin Gentry system, because they've been kind of mixing and matching personnel that doesn't quite fit his system.
Yes.
And that's why I'm a little confused on the Jahlil Okafor rumor, because he doesn't really fit the system that Alvin Gentry plays either. It's just kind of mind-boggling right now, and I think some of the players are disillusioned by it as well.
Look, nobody wants to talk about firing of general managers and coaches, but at this point, if this team does not make the playoffs, they don't turn it around, do you anticipate changes?
Oh, I definitely think there'll be changes at some point. I'll be surprised if they make any changes during the season, especially before the All-Star break. I don't see them doing that with the big stage they're going to have here in New Orleans. But I could see them making changes maybe across the board, especially if things continue to go the way they're going now.
Brett?
Yeah, the only reason they probably, it might be confusing for the fan base, but you got to remember when George Shinn owned the team, it was all he had. And so when attendance was down, revenues were down, the team wasn't doing well, he had a very quick trigger finger to try to change things around and energize the fan base. And the Saints do have the luxury because they have it's stable ownership with a lot of resources and an asset that has grown in value. So they can be patient and take the long view. I don't think they're feeling a lot of financial pressure to make a change. But at some point, your competitive instincts probably have to kick in, and you have to realize that you've waited long enough to see if what's going on is going to work, and then you got to make a change.
Brett, I think that's the problem. I think in the NFL, you can take the long view, in building a team. I think in the NBA, you can't. I think in the NBA, you see turnover very quickly. 3 years, you don't have together. They're changing regimes till they can get it right. I think that's one of the big differences, and I think they've run this NBA team in a lot of cases with the patience that they've run the NFL team.
But that's just their MO. I mean, that's the way Tom Benson runs all of his businesses. He's very loyal, sometimes to a fault, and they see the value of stability, certainly in the front office. And I think in this case, they wanted to give Dell Demps a clean slate to hire his own head coach, and they want to give it time to see if it works. And that's kind of where they were at, because it was unusual circumstances where he was hired after Monty Williams was hired.
Yeah, and not only that, but all that stuff went on when the NBA owned the team, and the NBA, stuck him with the Eric Gordon trade instead of the trade they wanted to make for like Pau Gasol and the
Goran Dragic.
The Laker and Goran Dragic, two players who are still pretty successful right now.
But there would be no Anthony Davis.
There would be no Anthony Davis because they would have won more.
I don't agree. I mean, it could have been. You just don't know.
Well, you really don't know. But
they could have traded some of these guys and bottomed out.
They could have, but they they would have had more valuable assets to trade, I guess. But the thing is, I think they wanted to give him a clean slate, and I think they really looked at last year as year one for Dell Demps, and then after all the injuries, they looked at this year as year one for Demps and Gentry, and that's what makes it hard for them to say one bad year we're gonna, are we gonna pull the rug out from under them now?
But the problem is that if you're performing an evaluation on what's happened this year, when they've had pretty healthy
they have
lineup
been very
for the last
very healthy,
few weeks,
right.
and they're not even a 500
no,
team.
They're not.
And now Tyreek Evans is hurt again. They're just spinning their wheels.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's go to the phone lines. 866-3200 is the phone number. Tahoma and Greg. Greg, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, Greg.
Hey, guys, got a question. Do you guys see any surprising cuts or trades for the New Orleans Saints this year? Maybe trading to get something in draft picks, or a surprising cut that you wouldn't expect? And I'll hang up and listen.
Thank you. Jeff?
Well, you never put it past Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis to make a deal. I mean, they're very aggressive in that regard. I know a lot of people have rumored that Brandon Cooks might get dealt. I'd be very surprised if they messed with anybody on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe they were to cut Jarris Byrd just because they feel like his contract is a little out of whack, and they've got depth at secondary, at safety. I could see him being potentially a cap casualty. He seems like the most logical person that could be moving on. I know he played better last year, but not well enough. And they've got Von Bell and Kenny Vaccaro, and I think they really like this Eric Harris, who didn't really play much last year.
Right.
He's another guy that's going to be 1/10 of what the salary that Jarris Byrd brings in.
True.
Yeah, I mean, I agree right there. That's probably the most likely scenario. I felt like they were the most aggressive in terms of trading to change the draft early on, especially in 2006 when they were trying to overhaul the team. I don't know. Remember they traded, and even after the draft, they traded Dante Stallworth, right? And they traded for Scott Shanley, I think.
Yeah,
is that right? They made a trade during the draft, I think, to bring in Jeff Fain as center and
They
stuff
traded
like
for Vilma and Shockey
and Hollis Thomas.
Hollis
too?
Thomas, yeah.
And I could see them making this could be a year where they get back into the let's trade up and go get a guy. We definitely need an edge rusher. I mean, Sean Payton is an impatient guy by nature, and he's tired of watching this non-existent pass rush. I could see them go get a guy if they really liked him.
Well, you mentioned something in the break, and I agree with you 100%. They got to get faster. You look at Atlanta, and you look at the speed they put on the field. At one time, Atlanta had to emulate the Saints in terms of their offense. They had to keep pace. The Saints now have to keep pace with their defense and maybe trying to emulate what Atlanta's done in terms of the speed on defense.
Yeah, you're built for your own stadium, too. You're on a fast track, and they're not particularly fast on the defensive side of the ball, and that's something that they've got to do. I think they took a step in that direction, but with all the injuries in the secondary, it kind of was a setback.
I think that's going to be a premium as well. Let's go back to the phone lines. George is in Metairie. George, welcome to Inside New Orleans Sports. Hey, George. George, you with us? Okay.
Yes.
Hey, George.
I'd like to know, how you doing?
Good.
I'd like to know if the Saints have anybody local to scout the local schools like LSU and all the local Louisiana schools.
Thank you for the call, guys. Obviously they do, right?
Oh, yeah, they definitely are very well aware. I know it doesn't seem that way because they haven't drafted very many of them. But I think this could be the year. And this could be a year where they end up landing an LSU player. But they certainly are well aware. I mean, they're always heavily in attendance at LSU's Pro Day, and they actually kind of help run that thing.
Right.
So they're fully aware of what's going on at LSU. It just hasn't worked out, is what Mickey Loomis said at the Senior Bowl.
And Brett, what's interesting about that is he really addressed it, where in the past they've kind of blown it off when reporters asked that. But he went out of his way to address it once asked the question.
Yeah, well, he was probably just tired of hearing about it, but
No doubt.
But it kind of makes sense what he says. I mean, a lot of things have to fall into place for that to work out, and they've drafted LSU guys before, and some of them didn't work out, like Al Woods.
Only one, Al Woods. That's it in this regime. That's it.
Yeah, I guess
Only
that's
Al
it.
Woods.
Yeah.
Guys, speaking of LSU, Damian Craig, Jabbar Juluka fired. They hired Mickey Joseph and Tommy Robinson. Some people are kind of upset. There was supposedly a New Orleans high school coaches boycott, which again that has been debunked at this point. I would think that anyone that's out there would think that you got to give Coach O an opportunity to hire his guys, right? I mean, if you're going to judge him on 1,000 days, which is about 3 years, is what his contract is, ultimately you got to give him the opportunity to build the best staff in America. So I don't really have a problem with him, firing some of the coaches that he has, because if he's going to be judged, he's going to be judged on his coaches.
Yeah, he's got to put his staff together. And look, he recognizes, as any coach at LSU recognizes, that you've got to take care of New Orleans. I mean, that is a fertile recruiting ground. And they opened that thing up about 20 years ago, and it's been a pipeline for LSU. You cannot mess that up. And it can get political in New Orleans sometimes with the high school coaching staff. You've got to be in good graces. Bringing in Mickey Joseph, guy that's very familiar, I think was a great hire. Now, we'll see if it pays off, because right now, Coach O's getting beat up in the state of Louisiana. I mean, Alabama rated very successfully this year, some of the top prospects. And they've got to cut off that pipeline quickly if they want to, hope to compete with them.
Brett, you cover LSU. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the good news for LSU is, and the reason they got so much praise nationally for their recruiting class, being in the top 10 is because, even Saban and Miles' first classes, transitional classes they call them. I mean, those guys were in the 20s. So he did pretty well overall, but it was by percentage the fewest number of Louisiana players in the class ever, I think. I mean, it's kind of hard to document it that carefully, but it's pretty well based on conventional wisdom about the program. It was the fewest number of Louisiana players relative to the size of the class they've ever had. So, I guess you got to hope that a guy like Mickey Joseph can be like almost like as good recruiting here as Curtis Johnson was for out-of-state schools,
right?
Like Miami and stuff. So,
right, and of course, same theme for Tulane. That didn't sign any New Orleans players. And obviously, Coach Fritz is going to have to get to the point where he's in these high schools and bringing in New Orleans players like Curtis Johnson did at Tulane.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's a big challenge for them right now. They don't really have anyone on their staff that has those connections. They're going to have to, clear that hurdle and mend some fences, I think, with some relationships in the local community. Because and also I think locally they've got to give Tulane a chance a little more. I mean, I think right now, kids are more apt to go to Louisiana Lafayette than they are to Tulane. Yeah. And it's a level below what Tulane plays at. And I think Tulane feels like that they have a better reputation in East Texas than they do here in their own city.
Yes.
So there's some work there for both sides.
Can you add anything?
Well, this coach is still relatively new, and a lot of his recruiting base was in Texas. So, I think that he's trying to play to his strengths and gradually work his way up here. But, he inherited a lot of New Orleans players, and he struggled with that team.
Yeah, he did.
So
well, they didn't fit his system, so that was part of the problem, no doubt. Brett Martel, Jeff Duncan, thanks so much for being with us tonight on Inside New Orleans Sports.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Always great to have you guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE at 10 p.m. Also, you can catch me on the radio, 990 a.m. WGSO. That is weekdays, 11 a.m. until 1 p.m. 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. You can catch the show at ericasher.com. You can download the podcast there. You can catch all the previous episodes of Inside New Orleans Sports at ericasher.com as well. And don't forget about Pelican Sports Television. That's 9 o'clock on Friday night. You catch us statewide there as well. Also, want to thank the WLE production staff here. They do a great job in producing this program. Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Donovan Joseph, Kenny Juno, Naila Jones, Philip Williamson, and Richard King, and also my director, William Hill. Special thanks to our guest tonight, Brett Martel, and also Jeff Duncan. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll check you out next week with another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports.
Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is the first place award winner of the 2015 New Orleans Press Club's Excellence in Journalism Award for the category of Best TV Sports Show.